Ann, I'd like to begin with you. The only problem in John Meacham's comparison to today to a John Dean moment, we could hear and see John Dean. I've got no video to show the folks in our audience tonight of what went on today. It's an acute problem for the Democrats, who have thus far not proven adept at storytelling. Witness the Mueller report, but we'll get to that later on in the broadcast. What we know from today, we learned from your team, broke the story of the opening statement. Tell our audience in your own words what kind of story Ambassador Taylor told today.
Well, Brian, Ambassador Taylor gave Democrats a kind of a step-by-step roadmap to what they should be looking at, and how he, as a career public servant, became disillusioned over the summer with what he saw going on around him in Ukraine. Recall that he took this job under sort of under duress at the behest of Mike Pompeo at the end of May, after the sitting ambassador, who was a friend of Bill Taylor's, had been ousted in what Taylor thought was completely, awful circumstances, and told Pompeo so. And Pompeo said, I want you to go. I want you to be the face and voice of the U.S. government. And Taylor thinks about it a little bit and goes. And almost as soon as he got there, he describes for Democrats and for everyone else in his opening statement how he saw two different things happening in Ukraine: the normal foreign policy, of which he was the face, and a whole set of shadow foreign policy outreaches to the new Ukrainian government, which he was there to protect and defend. He wanted the United States to show its support for the new Ukraine government and their anti-corruption agenda and their pushback against Russia. And at first he thought that was happening. And then as the summer goes on, he sees how that is not happening. And he describes in a really detailed and as one lawmaker described to us today, damning portrait of how that sort of normal foreign policy is undermined by a shadow foreign policy led by people who were, in his view, doing the president's bidding.
Ashley Parker, Ambassador Sondland may grow wistful about his civilian life back home in Chicago. He was a major Trump donor. The job of EU ambassador sounded great. Now he may find himself hauled back before Congress for a do-over. Can you tell our audience why that might be?
Well, the reason he would be called back is basically to clean up what he said before, which doesn't really track with the more full picture we're seeing. Sondland, there's a sense that he was maybe trying to protect himself and was not totally forthcoming. And again, we don't know everything. We don't know everyone's responses to each question they were asked. But when you look at what he said, what he reportedly said, and then you look at what Bill Taylor said today in that 15-page opening statement that, as Ann said, really was a roadmap to say, when Sondland said this wasn't a quid pro quo, and when the president said this wasn't a quid pro quo, well, in fact, it was. That's what the facts and the evidence and the actual reality on the ground points out. And so you're sort of trying to square one version of events with another one, which is now much more complete and came from Taylor's extemporaneous notes and texts and emails, all of which can be rigorously and had been rigorously documented.
And Mika, that brings us to our friend and former Fed, Elie Honig, who wrote today, when a trial witness gives testimony like Bill Taylor gave today, that's usually when the defense lawyer slides over at a break and asks if the plea offer is still on the table. Mika, I know you guys don't always get to pick your witnesses, but the diligence that Ashley just talked about on the part of this former military man turned veteran diplomat had to add to his luster as a witness.
Yes, I think that's right. And also his sense of integrity and the importance of what was the bipartisan U.S. policy, his adherence to what was in the U.S. national interest. It's very clear, and it comes through in his written statement, that what he was concerned about is that we knew what the U.S. policy was, which was to help the Ukrainians fend off this Russian aggression, The president was basically extorting them by withholding aid that they desperately needed. They're like a drowning man, and Trump is holding back the life preserver and saying, I need you to do this thing that they don't want to do. And Bill Taylor's recounting of that, the timeline and the detail, his focus on what was normal and what was not normal is really stunning.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.